Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this live stream. I don't know if the introduction played properly there or whether it froze. It certainly looked to me like it was freezing. However, I thought I'd just crack on. And today we're doing a special one. It's an open invite to anyone who is a Matt Dillahunty fan, who is a secular humanist, and who wants to discuss liberal secular humanism and Christianity. I am joined by an august panel of well-known apologists in my village anyway, and I am glad to be joined by Chris at Speaker's Corner, Daniel,
hi guys,
Apologetics, and the one and only Mary Hobb. So welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. We all know what we're here to do. We're here to talk about liberal secular humanism and Christianity. And if you are a liberal secular humanist, after regular intervals, we'll be sharing the link for any liberal secular humanists that want to come on and talk and to have a conversation. We may be joined by a few other apologists later on. And we're going to be here for at least an hour, 2 hours, 2 hours at least. So I hope you guys have a great time with us. So without further ado, we'll open the floor to get this baby rolling. Does anyone want to kick us off with a conversation point on liberal secular humanism vis-a-vis the Christian faith?
Well, if you don't mind, I can start.
Ladies first.
Go for it.
All right. So one of the main things that liberals human secularism attempts to do is it attempts to take off with the virtues that were introduced by Christianity, distinctly Christian virtues, and then attempts to turn them into whatever that particular individual feels like is most pleasurable, because at the root of Christian secular humanism, particularly all the forms that we see in the West, it's all utilitarian at its foundation. It all tries to be utilitarian, and utilitarianism defines the best good as pleasure. And they'll say that pleasure is not the rolling of pigs in muck. You know, if you've read John Stuart Mill's, whose book is like the most famous seminal work on the topic that really popularized it. Don't worry, folks. People won't be doing disgusting and degrading things for pleasure, because they will understand that the refined human palate, which is so far above that of the animals, will find the greatest pleasure, the best good. The best good is going to be in cerebral types of activities. Not in these physical types of activities. And John Stuart Mill was writing this at the same time that you have folks like the Romantic poets who were sleeping with literally anything that didn't run away fast enough and were, you know, high on opium, drunken all the time, doing weird things, spending their wealth completely on themselves, who were incredibly intelligent. These were not stupid people among the Romantic poets. Yet he's saying that the person of knowledge will always choose the refined best good. And this really boils down to a lack of being able to extract meaning from the world outside of not just a deistic context, but specifically a Christian context, because a lot of the other systems, you still can't extract any meaning out of them. There's no value. By meaning, I mean value. You can say, well, I can make it mean whatever I want. Well, yes, you can assign meanings to things, but for something to have an intrinsic value, there must be a reason for that value to exist. Not just, otherwise it is an opinion. It's an extrinsic value. It's something that you place on that. And then therefore, anyone who places a value on anything, everybody has different values and the values conflict, and you can't say which one's right. There is no right or wrong. It's just different people place values on different things. From an atheistic framework, you cannot say that any particular arrangement of atoms is more or less good, has more value than any other particular arrangement of atoms, or even the lack of any atoms at all. There is nothing intrinsic to matter or not matter or anything that gives it value. That's why they try to go to utilitarianism, but that turns each individual human into his or her own god, and then you have a war of the gods constantly because different humans have different opinions, and there's still no intrinsic value. It's just your feelings. It's just a decision to choose to value human feelings because we're human, which is the ultimate egotism, that human feelings matter. So because there is nothing intrinsically different between molecules arranged into a living baby and molecules arranged into a rock or molecules arranged into a dead baby, and it all boils down to opinion, then people say that my opinion is opinion that you should follow. There is no possibility of saying my opinion is right. It's only my opinion is opinion that you should follow because you would like that. I like these things. You like those things. If we pay attention to what each other likes, then we can both get the things we like. But the issue is, once that becomes your standard, the things that people like do in fact get more and more and more degraded, unlike what our buddy John Stuart Mill thought. He has been utterly and completely disgraced, because that is exactly why we have people gyrating naked down the streets and waving their privates in front of small children and saying that this is what society should be. This is goodness. This is goodness because goodness is pleasure. It is the highest good is the highest pleasure, and this is my highest pleasure. And you cannot deny that on the basis of anything else, nor can they leave any room for concepts such as age of consent. You can say that a brain isn't developed, but what does that mean? Why one age and why not another? If you're going by the pleasure principle, if the child doesn't object, then that's because that's totally legitimate. And this artificial construct of consent, age of consent, and all of this stuff is totally blown out of the water. So already we're done with age, because when you boil down to it, the goodness is the pleasure. And these other things that were inherited from previous civilizations, those need to go because they're not part of it. That's why you already have people advocating for maps and other things. That's why you have people already advocating for polyamory and incest. And soon, consent itself will go out the door, just as Kinsey did. Kinsey said that consent itself is artificial. The Marxist view of sexual continence is a capitalist hoarding his wealth and refusing to share. So if a woman has a commodity, sex, and she is walking down the street and she wishes to keep this commodity to herself and not share it equally among any who demand, then she's an evil capitalist. The family structure itself, with its exclusivity, is absolutely inimical to Marxism on the same basis of everyone having equal demands, because how can her pleasure of not having sex be higher than his pleasure of having sex? How can you say that? If there's equality,
sure.
How can you say that? So that is my first big argument, that you cannot, and there's also the fact that if you go the pleasure of the most people, then you will eliminate 49% of the people's pleasure in that. And then now you're down to a smaller group. Who's the majority there? Who's the majority there? Who's the majority there? Who's the majority there? If you're going by majority, which there's no reason to go by, because how would you quantify pleasure when degrees of pleasure are different? So that is just one of the major barriers to there ever being any kind of coherent system that does not dissolve into the most horrific abuses as being an atheistic, humanistic point of view. And that's still granting them, the important point, it's still granting them human supremacy, which you cannot grant, because you have many, many activists who have gone beyond human supremacy and who have gone, hey, why are we valuing humans? Why shouldn't we value the environment? Well, if humans do things to the environment, well, then humans are bad. And so the humans should be reduced, eliminated, not allowed to do things. Their pleasure no longer matters, because what about the pleasure of the elephant? What about the pleasure of the mouse? What about the pleasure of the bacteria, such as it is? What about its flourishing?
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a link into the chat, and what I'm asking, guys, is that anyone who is a secular humanist, if you want to come on and respond to Mary's argument, you're more than welcome. But I'm only asking for secular humanists, Matt Dillahunty fans, new atheists to come on. So if you're a Christian or a Muslim or any other ideology apart from secular humanism, I'm asking you to stay out of the conversation, please. And I would appreciate if you could keep to that rule, and if the mods that are in the chat could just remind people periodically that that's what we're looking for. And while we give people a chance to decide whether they're going to do that, I just invite the rest of the panel to sort of respond to Mary's argument. I think to some degree that it seems to me that there was a kind of assumption that the political narrative might go in a sort of left-wing direction, and I think that it doesn't look like it at the moment, but it could go in a politically right-wing direction. And the danger is that if we don't have any real grounding for values, except for what we socially contract amongst one another, going from your argument, the danger is that we can quite logically and have done quite realistically created social contracts that are incredibly destructive. I mean, we're living in one now with abortion and surrogacy, that's killed as many people as ever died in the Nazi death camps, and it's only just behind what died in Stalin's and within the communist gulags and death camps themselves. And I think that, the environmentalism, I would say, Mary, probably goes beyond the pale of secular humanism. I can see that it emerges out of secular humanism. The same milieu that gave birth to secular humanism has also given the road to environmentalism. But I wouldn't put the extreme point of view of the environmentalist onto the secular humanist.
Well, I do want to point out, hang on, I do want to point out that because the secular humanist does not have a foundation for the values that they are proposing, they cannot maintain their human supremacy, because humanism is a form of atheistic human supremacy over other things. So they have no defense. Their position is inherently incoherent. They have no defense against the people who go, but why the humanism? What is this? What's the point? Where does it come from? Why are you saying that we should all agree on this, even though it's not true and can't be true.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other comments or thoughts about what Mary said?
There's one thing I'd like to add, just based on what you were saying, Mary, is I think the issue of consent is extremely difficult to substantiate without a theistic worldview. I don't think, because there's a misunderstanding, and I would actually go further than not just people who are secular humanists, but generally among people in society, right? The average person that you meet will have this understanding that if you have consent, and as long as something is consensual, then it must be acceptable or morally neutral at the very least. And I think that's evidently false. I think there are many examples you can give in ethics where you can give consent and yet you can still commit great evils. And I think that most people would probably naturally agree with this. So, for example, if I give myself consent to kill myself, is this in any way a moral good? And I think it's self-evident. You know, I know that there are a few people that might not like me, but generally speaking, most people would agree that you shouldn't kill yourself, right? That's a bad thing to do. But if someone desires such a thing and they give themselves consent in however that is possible, then it's hard to argue against it if consent is your only form of good. Likewise, consent is defined as how. So there's tons of these kind of little episodes. You hear of people, particularly university students, they go out on campus and they have a lot to drink and they might hook up later. And there's this big issue about what does that look like in terms of consent? How do we say that both parties, the man and the woman, for example, in this analogy, how do we say they both gave consent if they're both under the influence of alcohol? That's difficult. That's a gray area, and there's not really a way to come down either side. But what you would say is you would say something like, well, what if someone has a deficiency in their mind of some sort, perhaps by an illness or perhaps by some disability? Can they give consent? And what does that look like? What happens if someone is financially desolate and someone has a lot of financial power? Is that still consent? I mean, it seems to be very hard to know, and it seems a very difficult question. And I think this demonstrates that consent as a way of saying that something is good or bad is insufficient. So a secular humanist can't argue from consent alone.
Well, also, there's the fact that humanists have generally agreed that there is no such thing. Modern ones, ancient ones ones from the Age of Reason did not recognize this reality. But the very fact that modern atheists generally, including humanists, agree that free will is a delusion. And therefore, what you have instead is a huge Skinner box that creates effects on different people in different ways. And it's entirely arbitrary because each person themselves does not have a choice as to how they're going to react in a given situation. It's pre-programmed into them. And therefore, any conception of law and order or law at all, rules at all, that will take some people who will necessarily do the things that they're not supposed to do. And then that again plays into consent. What is consent if there is no free will? If you do not have a real choice, if you're programmed to do one thing or another, what does consent even mean? And furthermore, the pleasure principle even itself does not at all play into whether or not, it doesn't help you to say, oh, well, if we're going to go with the greatest good, which is the greatest pleasure, then consent matters. No, because a lot of people don't know what they'll like or what's good for them or whatever else in that sense until it's happened. One thing that is incredibly common is women who are forcibly raped have orgasms. Under Kinsey's system, he says that proves that there's no such thing actually as rape, because if pleasure is produced, then that justifies the act. That was his point of view. That was his position. And so he says that rape is a social construct, right?
Yeah, I think, though, that just to play devil's advocate here, in fact, every secular humanist that I have ever spoke to would reject that logic. And whilst that logic can flow out of an atheistic worldview, I have never yet met the secular humanist that would agree with that kind of argumentation as being theirs or owning it for themselves. I think what you demonstrate is the fact that when we take truth off the table as the foundation, as a real thing, then everything comes up for grabs. Everything becomes possible. Everything becomes arguable. And again, from the secular humanist position, they'd be then saying, well, what's the social contract that we make?
Just so you know, I've
Can I
talked
say
to many
something to that,
people
John?
who will say
I'll let
human
Mary
flourishing.
reply and then I'll
really
let
quickly.
Mary reply and then Daniel go on.
Yeah. So I've met many people who would not necessarily go, I am a human secularist, but they will say, I believe in human flourishing. And that the greatest good and social contract and all the rest of these things. And I'll press them on free will, and they'll admit that, no, you don't have free will. I'm like, what does that even mean then? What does that even mean? That if you're the product of chance, what does a contract mean at that point? It's something that had to happen and has to punish people, and people are not responsible for anything really, because again, they're inside this huge Skinner box with no choices where things just happen and they must react a certain way. So I have met a lot of people who spout all the lines, but then admit, no, we have no, because they're in any atheistic system, you have no place for free will. There's nothing that exists, because materialistic atheism usually goes alongside with secular humanism. And if you're a materialist, you can't have, can't, with materialism, you can't have anything that has a choice, a will that is apart from the cumulative results of environment
physically it points towards determinism, definitely. Right. And physicists, just so you know, physicists would agree with that point, Mary. I'm speaking as someone who's familiar with a fair bit of physics, but physicists would agree with the point of a deterministic universe based on materialism. Daniel wants to jump in, then Chris, and then I think we introduce a new argument.
Yeah. So I just wanted to address that typical comeback that skeptics will bring up, because as you guys touched on, what's normative, like social contract of like social behavior, like that is often like response the skeptic will bring up, that the society is almost like the standard, or like what's good for the common, or like what's good in your society. That's, you roll with the society basically when it comes to morals and how to behave. What the problem is that just since Holocaust, Second World War, it's been over 20 genocides in the world, and a good handful of them are still going on today. For example, in Myanmar, Sudan, and China. And it's not too long ago since it was genocide in Guatemala, Rwanda, Soviet Union, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Cambodia, and many more. So which society are we following? Which one is good? And who are you to say this society is wrong on this and this? What takes to do a genocide? Well, it takes a lot of people. And studies have showed that we all almost carrying like this potential gene to commit these atrocities within us. But the point being that all societies are doing unethically around the world what they want. That can be mass murdering or other stuff, just like other collections of bacteria and cells are doing in the animal kingdom. So the argumentation of going to the social as the norm, or the society, it falls through as well.
Okay, Chris, your final comment, and then we're going to move on. You're on mute, bro. There's always one.
Always one. Yeah, usually I'm pretty good with that. So one thing, Bob, I just mentioned you can probably pin the comment in the chat just so it stays at the top of the chat for the StreamYard link if you want. But what I was going to say is just real quick. I tend to find that secular humanists just embrace the ontology of just an illusion. They will very happily say, "Yep, free will is an illusion. Society is in effect just an arbitrary conclusion that we draw. We're going to run the world as if there is a real such thing as moral duties and moral values, and they just bite the bullet. And to be honest, I think what's interesting is actually when you delve into that and you demonstrate that there is no coercion within secular humanism, even from a pragmatic point of view, rather than just ontology, which, I agree with everything we've said. There is no real free will and stuff that Mary said, and Daniel too. Completely agree with that. But I'll mention more of this when I go into my argument.
Okay, so I'm going to open up the floor now. We're gonna let someone else present an argument, and so anyone who jumps in at this point is going to wait in the back whilst the argument is fully made, and then they'll be brought forward. As I say, guys, this is open to any Matt Dillahunty fans, any secular humanists that want to come on and talk to us. We'd love to hear from you, but we're only asking for secular humanists to come on board. I don't know how to pin things to the chat because I'm a total novice and idiot, but don't worry about that because I'll figure it out later. Who wants to go next?
I can go next, if that's all good.
Go on, Chris.
Cool. So I think that Mary has touched on quite a lot of things that I was going to touch on, and there is obviously going to be a lot of overlap. I'm not muted, am I? No, I'm not. Between all of us and what we say here tonight, because the arguments against secular humanism are both very focused, very reasonable, very clear to most people, so much so that I would think that people who are aware of them, the arguments for secular humanism and against it, would generally side against it. The reason being is that, in effect, it is not a coherent system. You need to derive a social contract of which I'm not even sure is realistically possible. And that social contract is going to vary between periods of time. To give you an example, I don't see any reason, and I believe there are historical cases where social contracts have been drawn in which homosexuality is illegal and punishable as a crime. That's something that you will have to deal with as a secular humanist as a real thing that could happen. And just to reiterate something that you may already be familiar with, homosexuality is generally frowned upon by the majority of the world even today. It is only in the West, and very much so a bubble of the West, where homosexuality is seen as anything generally speaking positive. There are issues, even if you were somehow able to get consent, which I don't think you can. As Mary rightly pointed out, I do actually agree with your example, Mary. An extreme form of environmentalism, actually, as a secular humanist, you could adopt that. An extreme form of antinatalism, you can adopt that. There isn't any real reason why you shouldn't. As an extreme form of conservationism, you can adopt that. Why not? I mean, it brings into question whether humans really are the top dog, so to speak. Do they have any intrinsic value? Or perhaps animals do. And there's a very big human element to this. We've long known there are some funny statistics about how people are more likely to give to charity to, like, save the dolphin, save some animal, save the polar bears, than they're likely to give to starving children in Africa, for example. There are weird things like that. There are tendencies with human nature, which I would argue is flawed and not perfected at all, that leads to bizarre, selfish outcomes. You can look at people like Richard Dawkins when he talks about a selfish gene. I think that is self-evident. I mean, I wouldn't describe it in such a term. I would use a Christian term to describe the same thing in a sense. But rather, yes, human beings fundamentally will serve their own interests. An interesting phenomena, which I think is a real issue that secular humanism, I think, has yet to address, is the fact that, generally speaking, populations, although global population is still increasing, it's starting to decline that increase. And eventually, when we hit around 9 billion people, according to some academics, we'll eventually hit the max. And then the human population is, from then on, going to decline. Why is that? We have never lived in a better time. We have more resources than we ever have. We, in some sense, and I'm going to say very much in some sense, we are more peaceful than we've ever been. And yet somehow people are choosing not to have children. Why is that? Well, there's been a lot of research onto this, and it seems to be that there is a combination of economic factors and the fact that people will, once they have all of their general needs, when you go through Maslow's hierarchy, I think it's called, and when you climb to the very top and everything you have, you do have in some sense, which even people in lower income brackets are reaching in real sense compared to hundreds of years ago, you don't want to have kids. People will just say, no, I'm going to focus on myself because I have many good reasons to do so. And I think that is part of what it means to have a fallen nature and part of what it means to have a selfish gene. What is the secular humanist answer to that? Interestingly, there have been historical cases where they did have answers to that, and they mass forced rules to say that you had to have certain amounts of children in some societies, particularly communist or socialist regimes. And this was an answer to population problems. I mean, usually this came from other reasons like war, but the same kind of answers are going to be needed when that 9 billion starts to go down. And again, so there is no coherent social contract on how to deal with this. How do you embrace individualism to such a strong degree that secular humanism promotes, while somehow also having to treat humans on a communal level? Christianity has an answer for this. We have virtues. We are all grounded in the image of God. We all have intrinsic value. That doesn't change if you disagree with me. It doesn't change if you disagree with anyone on this panel. I cannot command that you are in some way punished for your belief or for who you are, because you are still made in the image of God. This is not so with secular humanism, unless, of course, they want to borrow the Judeo-Christian ethic, which is probably what you would have to do anyway, realistically, if you wanted to be a secular humanist in a way that is consistent. And I'm going to end it there.
Okay. I think it is the case that in terms of human values and human needs, that secular humanism kind of gives us a visionless society. It says human flourishing, but it never defines what that is. You know, it just seems to be that human flourishing are things that we can agree upon as good, i.e. you don't kill me, I don't kill you, we've got food, we've got shelter, but the reality is that it seems to lose sight of the fact that, you know, that there are needs beyond those needs, such as the need for children, the need for the cultivation of a civilization. And it seems to me that secular humanists have no vision of civilization precisely because they center everything on the self and on the individual. And the sense of the self and the individual is paramount to the exclusion of civilization, or to the, you know, putting the idea of civilization on the back burner. And so we're seeing in our society an erosion, I think, of Western civilization, precisely because the values of secular humanism have gone mainstream, you know, and that was particularly powerfully in effect after World War II, when the idea of nationalism had become scandalized following 2 world wars, you know. In the 1960s, you saw the idea of individualism and individual expression becoming paramount. And where did it go? It went to exactly where Mary said, which is it went straight to the base kind of instinct, sexual free love, which has resulted in a decrease in human fertility in Western demography. And demographics is very much key to the continuation of your civilization. I'm gonna, sorry, just before you go, Mary, I'm just going to put the link into the chat. If there are any secular humanists that want to come in and respond to what you're hearing, you're more than welcome. Mary.
And that's an incredibly excellent point. We actually have the explanation of all of this beautifully laid out in the Bible, because the lie of the serpent in the garden was first to twist God's word, like the humanists running off with Christian values as if they can make them their own without God, and then saying that you will be wise and you will not die. You will be as gods. So you're going to be as gods, and you're not going to die. And that's what they're really promising. The self, as secular humanism puts the self in the position of God. And because there's so many gods, there are many conflicts. That's why you have abortion, because you are a god, and abortion is a fundamental sacrament of the God of self, because your pleasure your orgasms, your freedom to have sex, your freedom to go on vacation to wherever you want, go clubbing whenever you want, that freedom is threatened by the child that you yourself created. So you are not just a god, but you're an evil god, a god who kills his or her children. You are a vicious, evil, ancient god type of figure there. And that's what you are in secular humanism, because your pleasure has lesser beings sacrificed to it. And that is fundamentally why no system that is atheistic or humanistic or anything else, it cannot survive. It will die out. It will have no progeny because it eats its children, always. And this is what you see, that they leave nothing behind because they consume it all. And they're not the commands that we had in the garden. There were 2 about dominion, and there were 3 about multiply, because we are workers for God, and we are also as God in our working, loving creation. So part of our loving work is creative, and part of that creativity is not just pleasuring ourselves, but is rather to take pleasure in our work, which includes our children that we leave behind us. Our work is in time. It's chronological. It's a chronological work. It's a legacy. And that is a big part of it that is meant to be intended.
Okay. Trista, what have you got? How would you, do we land on your point? Because I was kind of reading, checking to see a couple of things. I'm trying to get vocab on here. What are your thoughts on what we've said?
Yeah. there isn't too much to add.
What are your thoughts on what
yeah, pretty much. I've just been reading some of these comments going on. It'd be interesting to find if there is anyone who would be willing to debate these with us. I haven't seen anyone say anything yet.
Yeah, I mean, the invite's there. There's does anyone else have anything to say on Chris's thing, or shall we introduce a new argument?
Yeah, I mean, I can just say it's it is. It's not like this whole thing that we are saying is like misrepresenting of even the literature. We're talking about Richard Dawkins earlier. His book River Out of Eden, page 133. It's where he says that DNA neither care, DNA just is, and we dance to his music. Furthermore, we have a very popular book that was written by what's it called? Yuval Noah Harari. And this is page number 433, I guess. And he is saying here, 438 from Yuval Noah Harari. And he goes on to say that scientifically, human life has absolutely no purpose or no meaning. Whatever people give their life of subjective purpose is ultimately just an illusion. And that is personally, it's touching a little bit of what Chris and Mary's been saying, but when I was on my journey a decade or so, and I looked into the most consistent old school atheist and just trying to follow the worldview through, what I just see is that in a godless universe, we humans are ultimately an end product of a cosmological accident from nothing, which is actually something, just definitely not God. And after billions of years of evolutionary process happened, and we end up being the dominating species on this random purposeless planet, and we are probably the worst one also, because we are trashing the ocean, and we are burning up the rainforest and doing all these things. So how I am looking on myself, if I am not a Christian, and I don't see image bearers of God, even people that
just to interrupt you very quickly, Daniel. Sorry, just to say, Simon, I do see you in the back, and I'll let you in very shortly.
Yeah. So just what I was going to say to end my point is that how I see people, if they are not image bearers of God, then that I'm supposed to honor, respect, and love, even if they are my enemies, according to the words of Jesus. Then I don't see what is stopping me from taking advantage as a monkey in a society, or as just like a chimpanzee in the jungle, and me as a monkey in society, to just take advantage of getting as much pleasure, as much power, as much experiences, sex. You have it. I don't see how I would be stopped by stepping on others in order to elevate myself, because our human brain is not targeting truth. It's targeting firstly survival and pleasure. And in my 80-year-old lifespan as a collection of bacteria and cells, I don't see what is stopping me from going through to get what I want of these desires. And as I just mentioned earlier in this discussion, society is also not a standard to lean on, because look at the world, 20 genocides in the last, just since Holocaust, and there are many of them going on still today. So which society am I supposed to? No, I'm doing my thing because I'm a collection of.
I'm gonna bring Howdy in. Howdy, please do remember this is for secular humanists only. So if you're not a secular humanist, I am going to ask you to leave. So please bear that in mind. But assuming that you are a secular humanist and you get the brief, I'm going to invite you in. I'm going to give you time to respond to whatever you want. And then obviously we'll have a bit of a conversation. So I'm bringing in Howdy now. How you doing, Howdy?
Hi there.
Nice to have you. Hope you're well.
Yeah, of course. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Can I just confirm before we go any further that you are a secular humanist?
Right. Well, I mean, we can do that. So if I'm not adequate to discuss this, that's fine. But I do like the topic. But anyway,
Are you a secular humanist? Sorry.
Right. So.
Sorry, Howdy. One second.
I would say yes.
Sorry, Howdy. I need to confirm.
Right.
Are you a secular humanist?
Could we define that before we continue?
Okay, that makes me think you're not.
Well, are you a materialist atheist? How about that?
Materialist? No.
Are you an atheist?
I am.
Right, but you're not a secular humanist.
Right. So could you?
Right.
Wait, could I just ask? Should society be governed by a secular form of ethics with man at its center and logic as its basis, or would you at least contemplate the idea that a theistic understanding of ethics could work, or is good, or something along those lines?
I see what you mean. Yeah, I suppose not. I think there needs to be some sort of
Howdy, I'm sorry, bro,
right,
but I'm going to remove you because I was very clear. This is for secular humanists, and if we're not letting Christians in, who I'm sure would love to come and chat with us, then I'm not going to let someone who's not a secular humanist come in just to talk. This is for secular humanists to come in and talk, not just for anybody. If I'm excluding Christians and Muslims who I'm sure would love to come and argue with us or talk with us, then I'm not just going to let anyone in. So
it makes sense.
Secular humanists. It was very plain and very clear that this is secular humanists only. So I'm sorry, bro, Howdy, you can't come in.
But
we do love you,
with iron fist.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. It's right there in the title. Liberal Secular Humanism V Christianity. Matt and Dillahunty fans welcome. So these are the people that we're talking to, and these are the people that we're inviting on. If you've got some other perspective that you can't define as that, then come to another show when we do a general Q&A, or when we do a Christian change your mind kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to jump in next, and I'm going to give my argument. If you come in while I'm talking, we'll just wait in the back, and we'll go forward. So liberal secular humanists often make the argument against the Christian faith that, how can we believe in a God that permitted slavery in the past, that allowed one human being to own another human being as a piece of property, and to treat them like they owned them, and to buy them and to sell them and to abuse them. And the problem with that argument fundamentally is it starts with a mischaracterization of what Christianity is. We're not saying that Christianity is a book-based faith. The Christian faith is about our discipleship in the Lord Jesus Christ, our acknowledgement that he is the Messiah of the God of Israel, and that he was crucified and that he rose on the third day, and that he establishes a new covenant in his person, and that new covenant is embodied in the church that brings about the kingdom of God through the power and the work of the Holy Spirit in the life of the believer, that the saints build a civilization to reflect the values and the beliefs of God. And it isn't the case when secular humanists make this argument about slavery, they're often presenting a mischaracterization because they're presenting it as liberal secular humanism versus the Bible, which misunderstands the fact that Christians read the Bible paradigmatically through a paradigm of covenants. And we believe ourselves to be in a new covenant. And in that new covenant, our Messiah said that he had come to set the captives free. He's quoting a prophecy in Isaiah. And that prophecy was talking in the time that Isaiah was speaking. When it spoke of captives, it was speaking of slaves. And when Christ said, I have come to set the captive free, then he's talking about slaves. Now, that has a meta-narrative application in the sense that we are all slaves to sin, and that we are all slaves to the lies of the God of this world, which is the devil, which is Satan. And we are all slaves to the principalities and powers and the demonic forces that govern this earth. But it also has a real application to the idea of actual slaves. And so what you found was, because the first Christians saw themselves as people being set free by Christ from slavery, that they went on to go and set slaves free in imitation of Christ. And so you've got Saint Millennia, who set 8,000 slaves free. You've got Saint Avidius, who set 500 slaves free. You've got Saint Chromatius, who was a Roman prefect under Diocletian, who set 1,400 slaves free. You've got Hermes, who was a prefect under Trajan. Emperor Trajan, he set 1,200 slaves free. St. Augustine encouraged his clergy to free their slaves because he believed that slavery was in connection to sin. St. Constantine established the death penalty on slave traders, on people that kidnapped for the slave trade. He applied the death penalty to them. Justinian abolished all laws hindering the freeing of slaves. Lactantius, in his Divine Institutes, said that there were no slaves in God's eyes. Saint Chrysostom said, in Jesus Christ there is no slave, therefore it is not necessary to have one. Buy, teach, and release your slaves. St. Patrick in Ireland condemned the slave trade. And for 1,400 years, Christians have gone into the world to set slaves free in the Islamic world. And we're still doing that today. You can see us do it with organizations like Christian Solidarity worldwide. And the most recent example would be Sir William Wilberforce, who, with others, managed to convince the British Empire to abolish slavery. And he used Christian arguments to do it. And then the British Navy spent treasure, blood, and resources to suppress the slave trade across the world, even for other countries, and did so out of a sense of Christian mission. Now, the reason why I raise that is because the very people that are criticizing us for slavery in the Bible, secular humanists, are in favor of surrogacy. I want to read an example of surrogacy. So this is reading from the Mail Online, and it is, I'm just going to read the headline. Renting our wombs is the family business. 4 sisters from the same family make $10,000 a year having babies for gay European couples in Mexico's secret surrogacy trade. The article goes on. I won't read it all. You'll get the picture of it. 4 sisters stand gossiping underneath the washing line, the growing baby bumps visible under tightly fitting tops. But the unemployed Hernandez sisters are not looking forward to the birth of much wanted babies. Instead, they are wombs for hire, willing to put their bodies through the agony in order to earn thousands from desperate Europeans, prepared to pay more than these single mothers could earn in 20 years for their chance to have their own biological child. This is a family business, one which is not discussed outside the walls of the home, just one cog in Mexico's secretive and sometimes corrupt surrogacy industry. Our neighbors accuse us of running an infant trafficking ring, shrugs Martha, who is 4 months pregnant with a baby being bought by a gay Frenchman. Now, here's my problem. We are being attacked because of the slave trade that's discussed in the Bible by people who support the buying and selling and commercialization of human beings and the human body because of the religious doctrine that my desires and my self-ambition and my self-will should find fulfillment. So if I'm in a gay couple, then I have the right to a child because that is what I want, and no one can question me. And so I can go to a woman in who's in a particular part in desperation, rent out her womb and buy her child, thus denying that child the right to her mother. Now, it's not always the case that either of the two are the biological parent, especially if the gay couple's a lesbian couple. You know, sometimes these children have no biological connections to their children, and they are being bought and sold like commodities. And so I want to say to all my... Go on. Sorry, go on.
So just real quick. Sometimes also they intentionally make it so it's not known. So that in the case of 2 male homosexuals, they may choose to not know which one of them is the actual biological father. So the child doesn't have a biological mother that they have a relationship with, nor that they actually know who is their real biological father.
Wow.
So that's another. Yeah, I've heard it's weird.
And so we are denying children their rights based upon wish fulfillment, desire fulfillment of the self. Because apparently in Western liberal secular humanist values, the self cannot be contradicted. And so I want to say as a Christian to all secular humanists, I am not interested in your arguments about slavery in the Bible, because Christians don't practice slavery today, and Christians have a consistent track record of 2,000 years of fighting against the slave trade. You deal with the fact that too many of your compatriots in the secular humanist movement are okay with buying and selling children like commodities. It's not us that need moral reform. It's you that need moral reform. And the reason why you are okay with that is because what matters to you is the self, individual autonomy, and the idea of the self maximizing their own fulfillment and the living out of their own desires, into which even children themselves can either be sacrificed on the altar of abortion or can be bought and sold like slaves, but they're not slaves, but they're more like, you know, your wish fulfillment in the way that somebody might want to buy a Lamborghini. And I think that that is incredibly immoral. And I don't think you need to all be silent about this argument on slavery until you're willing to come out 100% against the surrogacy trade.
So one thing that's very important to realize is the many, many different definitions of slavery that existed in history and were understood in history. The state of unfreeness was what was meant. And even though it was Christians who abolished what we call chattel slavery, which is not a very helpful topic because people like to pretend that there wasn't chattel slavery in ancient times, but different forms of slavery that involved open slave markets. Let's say that. A form of slavery that involves an open slave market, Christians abolished that, and also passed many laws about other things, like certain kinds of contracts you can't have. If a person consents to a contract, the contract is void if it's determined that it results in slavery, for instance. And different ideas of that sort. Historically, when a person worked for someone else, they sold their time to that person for an entire year, and any time that they weren't sleeping belonged to the person that they sold their labor to. That was a concept of service. That
just
is,
to interrupt very quickly, Mary,
yeah.
I just want to say, Yamcha, I see you in the back, and Idris, I see you in the back, and I will let you on once Mary's finished this point.
So that is a form of now that was also done away with and considered, we're not going to have this form in our society. But that was a normal form for huge amounts of history. And there were taxation of 20% was called slavery at the end of Genesis. Corvée labor as a form of taxation was called slavery. All sorts of things are called slavery, and different. And an under king would say to his higher king, I'm your slave. So if you just say slavery, you cannot say that all slavery is wrong, even in the secular humanist view. There are very few people who say, there are some people who say, we should have no prisons at all whatsoever. But Augustine talked about, hey, some forms of slavery are necessary. Slavery was added because of sin and fallen nature. For example, disabled people can't go out without people who are their keepers, essentially. Childhood is a form of this type of slavery where you have a keeper, you have a master, and people who are criminals and who are assigned to some task after committing a crime, they are in a form of bondage, a form of slavery. Not being able to do what you want when you want it completely without restrictions is a form of some type of restriction that is unfreeness. And so you really have to decide what you mean by this unfreeness, what you mean by the slavery, what you mean by this. They're not all the same. Now, what the fathers understood from the beginning is that there was no state of bondage in the garden because we had not fallen into sin. But because of sin, bondage came in as a necessary institution in one form or another, such as the control that parents have. The parents need to discipline their children. They can't just raise them in perfect peace and happiness and there are never any conflicts, right? You have to raise your child to be a good citizen. And that involves making them sit on the sad step, or even if you're like super into gentle parenting, sometimes you have to talk to them and tell them no, right? There are these restrictions, there are these unfreenesses that have to come in, and that's because of sin. And in the ancient world, what was set up in the Israelite society was what would be an exemplary system for the nations of that time to look at. It was the best example of goodness within the constraints of place, time, economics, society that existed at that time. But it wasn't eternal. And that's why it's so important that the new law is written in our hearts. It's about principles rather than about a very, very specific rule that might be applicable for a place and time to avoid greater badness is. And so it's something that can change. For example,
wait, Mary,
we
before
could
you
say,
go, before
yeah.
you go on, I want to bring in Idris and Yamcha, because they're waiting in the back to come in and talk.
And I just have one very, very short example. So the age of marriage is one of them. In the Middle Ages, if you did not have your mother to feed you, your chances of surviving are extraordinarily low. Your baby is almost certainly going to die. And so it was, even though there was a great dislike in most societies for very young marriage, the age of consent for marriage was set at 12 for girls in most places. Some places it was 13, a few places it was 14, but was around puberty, to avoid the situation that you would have a girl who got with a boy willingly, ends up pregnant, and cannot be married, and so now is in a very precarious situation where it's expensive to care for a family, and that boy cannot be assigned to care for her because she can't be married to him. And so she is uniquely punished, and so is the child. But today we have adoption. We have a much richer society. Adoption with formula so that babies can survive. They have things to drink, right? And we have a much, much richer society that can afford to raise children without a massive expense and burden on one particular person. So feeding people is not a huge deal. It's one reason why not as many things are capital crimes, because we can afford to feed prisoners.
Yeah.
And so we could raise the limit, and we could say it's better for it to be 16 or even 18. Okay, we could say that's objectively better in this situation, but before it was objectively better in the previous one.
I get your point. I want to bring Idris and Yamcha into this. I'm going to let you both speak, guys, but before you do, the very first thing that you need to do is confirm that you are indeed a secular humanist. Please confirm that first. So whoever would like to, Yamcha, would you confirm that you're a secular humanist?
Oh, hello. My name is not Yamcha, but that's will make other adjectives to use. Well, I'm not a secular humanist, and
right,
I didn't know that the life was specifically for. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry about that, Yamcha. Yeah, the title is Liberal Secular Humanism. I do apologize. Yeah, maybe I should have stated that. Yeah. So, Idris, are you a secular humanist?
Affirmative. I would say I identify with that, yes.
Fantastic. Then you're more than welcome. Thank you very much for popping in to talk to us. Feel free to reply to anything you've heard. Whichever point you want to make, but reply to one point and then we'll respond to that, and we'll have a bit of a conversation going backwards and forwards. So,
okay,
over to you. What would you like to say?
Maybe you can suggest a point, because I to be honest, I just caught little bits and pieces of your stream, but I do identify as a secular humanist. Is there maybe a certain topic you think is appropriate to start out with?
No, yeah, go on, Chris.
I was just going to ask some questions, and I guess you could
go for it.
Give us what you think is your best answer to them, I guess.
Yeah.
So do you think there could ever be a consensus on major ethical issues of today? For example, abortion or surrogacy. Do you think there could ever be consensus amongst secular humanists on those topics?
I don't think so.
Okay. Do you think that is in any sense a concern practically in society?
I think so, for sure. Absolutely.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think if you think there are problems with it, I'm not going to argue with you. I don't think it can be resolved.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my point of view is that it's kind of maybe like democracy. Like we feel like it's a really good system, but it has inherent limitations, and I don't think that it's possible to have a system that has no limitations that's perfect for everyone in all circumstances. And I think we see that in court cases, and even interpreting the law when the law it was made in good faith to cover as many circumstances. And my background is from Islam. But still, there's these weird situations that come up where there's really no good answer.
So just to reply, unless anyone wants to jump in, I do agree that perfection is probably not a good thing to aim for in this sense.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is good to aim for, though, is the avoidance of what could be described in perhaps, I don't know how the term would be defined, but you could say genocide if abortion really is, and given the large number of abortions, for example, in the United States of America today,
Mm-hmm.
that are happening, it could be seen that way if the child, the fetus, the baby in the mother's womb at the time of conception is actually a human being from an ethical point of view and also from a biological point of view.
Yeah.
So to me, I definitely don't want to go for perfection, but I think avoiding the death of potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of humans is something that we absolutely need to ensure we avoid. Otherwise, we can't have any basis for saying that a system is ethical.
Yeah, but I think these are the gray areas. Like we kind of know that I think we can all agree for the most part that it's unethical to just straight up murder a 20-year-old, right? Or a 6-year-old. But for example, like in Texas, we have this situation in the news now where, someone has an embryo with trisomy 18 and she's most likely...
let me talk about that one, please.
Okay.
Let Idris finish his point.
Yeah.
Hold on, Mary.
Okay.
You want to kill all the disabled kids with Edward syndrome.
Hold on, Mary. Hold on.
Oh my God.
Let Idris finish his point.
And I promise I don't really have a horse in the race. I'm going to try to be as honest and intellectually honest as possible. I'm not trying to push any agenda. So this situation, had it been my mother, for example, and that's like my sister is the embryo, for example, right? So from my understanding, the limited medical understanding is this baby is more likely to die in utero. And even if it's born this specific syndrome, the baby will live to like 2 weeks old. And if the baby dies in the mother, they'll have to do an emergency surgery. And there's a significant chance the mother could be rendered infertile to have any other babies. So that's a very specific circumstance where I think the reasons to allow an abortion outweigh the reasons to let the fetus live till birth.
Okay, I would like to respond.
Wait, just before the tiger mother savages you, I just want to point out that I think that's an incredibly fallacious argument, because the baby, even if they only live for 2 weeks, still has the right to those 2 weeks of life. And with that being said, I'm now going to let Mary talk before she savages me.
All right. So, yes. So trisomy 18, the reason why she is so eager to slaughter her child before her child is born is because her child is disabled and she doesn't want to have a disabled child. As soon as the baby is born, she can't kill the baby anymore. The baby's made it this long, so there are increasingly greater chances that the baby will make it to birth, beyond and through childhood, and even possibly into adulthood. So what she wants is her greatest pleasure to not be burdened by a disabled child. So she willingly created a child, and upon discovering that the child that is growing inside her is not the perfect child that she wanted, she wants to kill the child so that she doesn't have the chance of having to do that. Now, it is utterly and completely a disgusting lie that if your child dies, you have to have an emergency C-section and you're going to be infertile. Rather, there is a 10% chance with a DNC or with a DNE, with any kind of surgical approach, that she will develop Asherman syndrome. Do you know what Asherman syndrome is?
I think I don't want to get into this specific detail. I don't know what it is,
okay.
but I don't think. I can grant all the points that you're making. Let's just grant them all. That's fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So Asherman syndrome, it happens whenever you have scar tissue that form in the uterus after having a surgical procedure. Sometimes you do. If you have a partial spontaneous miscarriage and some of the placenta is retained, that placenta could get infected and you could potentially end up with a very serious condition after the miscarriage if it is retained. And so you do have to have a surgical procedure at that time to remove it to prevent that risk. But that procedure itself carries a substantial risk of forming enough scar tissue that after that point, other placentas cannot grow over that area. You have implantation failure, multiple miscarriages. And if you do get pregnant with Asherman syndrome, there's an incredibly high chance that you will have placenta accreta, because the placenta can never not grow correctly into the scar tissue. And so basically the uterus and the placenta join together, and whenever you give birth again, you typically hemorrhage and have a reasonable chance of dying. It's one of the major causes of death right now. Maternal death is from hemorrhage, directly from placenta accreta caused by Asherman syndrome. Women are not even told, they are not told when they have a natural miscarriage that this is a risk when they have the surgical procedure. Why is this being withheld from them? Why is this being kept secret? Because 10% chance that you are going to have serious complications from a single procedure, that's massive. That is massive. But they're not even being told, and they're not being told for philosophical reasons. This woman, if the baby died, the normal course of care for this condition is to monitor the child. The kicks stop. She goes in to the doctors. She gets a scan. They discover that the heart isn't beating. And then they induce labor. They don't give her an emergency C-section. They induce labor. And almost always, especially with small babies, the labor is successful and there are no complications. You don't have to have surgery. You don't have to have anything like that.
Okay.
So
Mary, let Idris come in.
So
Yeah.
I want to kind of get past all this, and I think these are important points, but I think to just steel man maybe the secular humanist perspective, that may be a bit much. So let's say that, like Mr. Bob had said, regardless of all that, let's say the mom is fine and so forth, does a baby deserve those 2 weeks, even if they're deformed and they have a right to that life? I can't answer that question. I don't know. I mean, it seems the mother, I think many mothers that are good people, that love their children, just may not want to, they don't feel that having a deformed baby that's going to die in 2 weeks and carrying it to term is a good thing to their, in their heart. Even though they're a loving mother, they love their other children, they just may not want that. But I can't.
Can I jump in on this? Because
yeah, sure.
One of the fundamental problems that I have with what you've just said is that what it does is it creates a relative value between the life of the child and the feelings of the mother. So in other words, what it's saying is that the actual value of the child is based upon how the mother feels about it. Now, it doesn't take any great imagination to realize that that is a horrendous way to think about the value of human life. That if we applied that kind of logic to any other kind of human, that logic would just fall flat. But yet we've been conditioned in the West to accept that logic that you've just articulated very well, Idris, on the question of abortion. And this cuts to the very heart of the problem of secular humanism, is that it makes a God of the self. And the God of the self is therefore able to execute judgment upon the value of another human life, their own children, based upon how they feel about it. And that is hugely problematic.
Well,
okay, so
can I say something, Bob?
You said 2 weeks, right?
There's a lot of people that want to talk.
Oh, sorry.
I've said something.
One clarification.
Let
Mr. Bob.
So I spoke, Idris replies, then Mary, then Idris replies, then Daniel.
Okay, so quick response to that, Bob. You're right. I agree with you. To make that blanket statement was not good. Maybe what I should have said was that the mother may feel that the baby is suffering, and so maybe if I can steelman this a little better, is that, let's say if the baby were to be born and you knew the baby would be in severe pain for 10 hours and then die. Let's just say that for that point. In that case, I feel like the mom might be justified to, let's say, terminate, let's say, the second day after conception. I'm done.
Okay, Mary.
We are all going to die, and we will all suffer. We will all have pain. I actually have a chronic pain condition such that I am in pain all the time at some level or another. My life is not worthless and not to be taken away because of my condition. Now, to take your example and extend it a little further, let's say the child has Tay-Sachs. Do you know what Tay-Sachs is?
I forgot.
So it's that Jewish disease that Jews don't typically get now. You die around 4 years old typically, and it's a neurological disease, and there's no stopping it. There's no cure. Jews these days, they take tests to see if they're carriers, and 2 people who are carriers don't marry. That's how they've gotten around it, basically. And let's say that you didn't do the test before you got married, and you have a kid, and when the child is born, you do a genetic test and discover that the child has Tay-Sachs at that point. That child is going to die at the age of 4. Would it be right for the mother to kill her child then? Child's going to die at 4. Can she kill her child then? Is that okay for her to walk in and kill her child?
Okay, Idris.
I would say if, like, the best case scenario, if she knew after conception on date.
Nope. Has anyone else?
You dropped out, but I understand what you're saying. So, but most of these cases.
Idris, sorry, 1 second,
Yeah.
Mary. Idris, we've lost you, bro.
Yeah,
I think
you dropped your mic.
Idris, can you hear us?
He might.
Hello, Idris.
I think he may be in a bad place.
Unmute yourself if you can.
Try again. Let's see if you've got connection back.
Idris, you're on mute at the moment. You need to unmute yourself.
Yep, currently on mute.
That's
Idris?
He's back.
We lost you. Idris, we lost you. So whatever you've said, we didn't hear it. So start again as if you're replying to Mary now.
Okay, I would say that if it was on.
We lost you again.
Okay, Idris, you've got a bit of a malfunction going on with your microphone. We're not hearing what you're saying. So, Mary, do you want to finish your point, and then when Idris, his mic's working, we'll let him reply. Go on. What were you going to say?
So I do want to point out, first of all, what actually does happen. None of these diseases are able to be caught that early. You have to do a scan that risks the death of the child because you have to do an amniocentesis or centesis. Sorry, it's been a long time since I've been pregnant. Or you have to do, everybody just calls it an amnio, or you have to do a different procedure that risks the death of the child no matter what. So you are already pulling a gun at your child's head to find out whether or not your child is defective. Then, after you determine that your child is what you believe to be defective, and that you do not like this child or want this child genetically, then the child is killed in a way that is usually terribly painful. Children at the age when they are killed for reasons of being unfit through eugenic murder do in fact feel pain, and nothing is done about that. It's completely unacceptable to painlessly kill someone for eugenic reasons, and it's doubly horrific to do it painfully. Now, at the age of this particular woman, let us be clear as to what she wants to have happen to her child. Her child will be ripped apart limb by limb and pulled out of her vagina in pieces while still alive. The child will be cut to pieces and pulled out of her vagina. Why? Because she doesn't want to care for a disabled baby. The fact that this is being couched in dishonest terminology, oh, her life is in danger. She wants to have one surgery and not potentially another. Why does she want to have this one surgery? Because this surgery ensures that she has a dead baby. What she wants, her end, is for her defective baby to be killed. And that is the end of all of these. It's to determine who is worthy of life and who is not, and come up with excuses not to. Some of the children, they'll just be suffering. Some of those children are children who are born literally without the upper parts of their brains, and yet they're suffering. For that particular group, they would not have a knowledge of their pain, right? For that one particular group. But to use their so-called suffering as a reason to kill them, then, no, it's because they don't want to give birth to a defective baby, and they think that this is going to be clean and nice, and the baby will just go away.
Daniel's been has been patiently waiting to say something. And Idris, I did see you in the back of the stage, but Mary was in full flow, so I just wanted to let her finish. You disappeared again, so I'm guessing you're having internet connections. You're more than welcome to come back if you get your internet connection sorted. Daniel, what did you want to say?
Yeah, so I've been waiting patiently. I remember, guys, I'm making very short videos on my channel, so I can make a very quick point. I don't need much time. But I will skip the biblical slavery part because we are on another topic now. But what I wanted to say to our guest while we're on this topic, the thing is that in my personal life alone, I have friends who has a child with a life-threatening. Basically, the message they got when a child was born: this child will be dead within a few weeks. And all of these children are way past their late teenage. Like they are 17, 18, 19 years old, and even if they are like disformed and they can hardly, their brain is hardly working. They are bringing a lot of pleasure to their parents, even because they can express something, or they give the parents something also. So just because you're getting like a death sentence, like when they are born, like from doctors, like this child will not live. Well, there's so many exceptions where that happen, and the child still keeps living on for decades. And how would you be in a position to just like determine that, okay, let's kill this child because it doesn't look good for it? As Mary said, we are all going to die one way as well. And furthermore, basically that's just what I want to say, like adding to when we were on that topic, because again, just because some doctors have good reasons, I'm not taking away anything from that, but the reality is that there are many exceptions where children are born with a disease or a sickness or chronic whatever, and they get the death sentence from the doctors that this child will not live for more than a few weeks, and they live to be 19 years old. I have 3 friends with child who got that message when they were born, and they are now in their late teens, and they give something to their parents also. So I have a little bit problem with what was said there before.
So just before anyone jumps in, Daniel, do you have I just want to say, militant atheist, I can see you in the back, and I am going to let you in due course. But Daniel, do you have, I don't know, have you made an argument yet against secular humanism, and would you like to?
Yeah, I would actually like to do that now. It will not take me so long, because while we are on the topic of children and families and all that, I made a YouTube short video a year ago or so, and I called it Sexuality, Why God Cares About It. And in that video, I list all the statistics to what I'm about to say now. So if anyone are interested in looking them up, they can go there. But to set up the argument, what is in Christianity is that child production is one of the closest imitations that we can do of our Creator, because through God's grace, we are bringing life into existence of one of His image bearers, right? And if biblical marriage between husband and wife, like imagine a child being born in a biblical marriage, how God sees it, between a husband and wife who are to love and honor each other for the rest of their life. The thing about this is that, according to statistics, there's been a lot of work done on this. It hasn't been so much on how effective it is with motherless homes, but the statistics that we do have them is very similar. But there has been a lot of research on fatherless homes. And there are some horrible statistics, and there are organizations created to fight this, because it's a really, really big problem in societies around the world. Because the reality is that if you take young adults, teenagers, and young people, I will not list a bunch of statistics because that will throw people off. But like in some places there are 65, some is 71, 67, but an average of 70%. Here's the argument: an average of 70% of young people that are in rehab for drug addiction, that are in prison for severe crime, that are taking suicides, and that are even in prison for murder. 70% of these young people are from fatherless homes. Now that is very interesting, because it's almost like God knew all along, isn't it? Like, families are so important. Fathers should stay, families and parents, they should stay together, create a safe home, and yeah, it's the right biblical way, the biblical marriage. The father is so important in the home, and like I said, there are the same with mother, but there have been more statistics and more research done on the fatherless homes perspective and all that. So that's the whole argument. A biblical marriage and worldview creates how, because now it's a joke. You go to marriage, people get married today, and it's when I got married, my heart was trembling. I took was like slow motion walking up there. I loved my wife. I knew I was going to marry her, and all was good. But I was not just making commitment to her. I was making commitment to God, that I would love her for the rest of my life, and I will offer myself up as a sacrifice even for her, because that's what, despite what critics love to say and quote Bible verses out of context, the women are fellow heirs with the men. This 1 Peter 3:7. We have in Paul. Imagine, find a religion that says a husband does not have authority over his own body, but his wife does. That's from the Bible. That's this is from Ephesians 5:21 and 1 Corinthians 7:3. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is that what the biblical worldview and what biblical perspective of marriage is, that husband and wife stay together, love each other, honor each other. You're both fellow heirs of the kingdom of God, and you're created in His image. This is undeserved God-given status that God has given us men, and just, imagine if these 70% statistics was gone. Boom, you have a lot of less evil in the world right there. I'm not saying that every evil is just gone away, but if 70%, those 70% statistic of the young people that are in drug rehab, suicides, in prison for severe imprisonment and even murder, if those 10% would just vanish, we all have a lot of evil already gone in the world. So what I'm saying is, it's almost like God knew all along, isn't it? And
I think, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link into the chat. And if you're a secular humanist and you want to reply to anything that you've heard, now's your chance to jump on. I did see Militant Atheist. I was going to let you in, but you've disappeared, bro. So if you want to come back, you're more than welcome. And that's same for you, Idris, as well. But the reality is that the social experiment that we've done since the 1960s of destroying the Christian concept of the family, not least also pushed by cultural communists, has resulted in the destruction of so much of society and at the cost of great harm. And it's almost like society is going to have to relearn the lessons that the Judeo-Christian tradition just took for granted as its backdrop. Forget building society on individualism. We need to build society on the family. Strong family units reduce your care costs, they reduce your health costs, they reduce your police costs, they reduce your social care costs, they reduce your benefit costs, your welfare costs. If you have strong family units, they absorb so much economic energy that each healthy family is a battery of energy, economic, social, political, cultural, and it's the means by which, even basic education's passed down. There's often a quip in British politics, at least, that people have forgotten how to cook. And the reason why they've forgotten how to cook is they weren't brought up in families where the tradition of cooking was being passed down from parents to children, kind of thing. And that's just the damage, the loss that occurs culturally by the destruction of the family on something small. But one of the reasons why we've got huge care costs in the UK is because we have what are euphemistically termed bed blockers, which are elderly people that have no one to look after them. And they don't have anyone to look after them a lot of the time because the family unit has broken down or they've had no children. And the result is the Judeo, secular humanism celebrates the fruits of rampant individualism, but the fruits of rampant individualism is the destruction of the family, and society is paying a massive cost, as Daniel's pointed out, because of the breakdown of that family. Does anyone else, what would you say to that, Daniel? And then does anyone else want to jump in on what Daniel said?
No, I think that you made a good summary of what I'm saying. The whole is the attack of the family. It's the most dangerous thing, and it's the adversaries made big aim and attack because once the family is getting corrupted and problems there, then the whole society collapses and becomes really bad, and that's why it's so important.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to jump in on what Daniel said?
If I may again, sorry, I could go like 50 hours on this topic. So I'm trying to be short, and things are very, very condensed. But when you start with secular humanism, in which you have no basis for value, you end up with a situation where people wake up, they become woke to the realization that these values that were placed upon the world are now, in their framework, arbitrary and meaningless. And therefore, for example, the entire argument that you should kill the disabled child because the disabled child's life is not worth living, suddenly secular humanists might declare that, but then you go to the next level, which is critical theory. And the critical theorists say that these value statements by the secular humanists are in this normative / white supremacist, by that they mean the same thing, within this patriarchal framework. And to go against the patriarchy, rather, what is true is that the disabled, the crippled, the deficient, the obese, the incredibly thin, the blind, the deaf, that needs to be uplifted and considered to be a state that is of high value and of greater value than what had been normative / patriarchal previously. And thus, you should argue from that, and they won't because they love abortion, but you should argue from that it is the disabled children who especially should be born and given more attention and more honor and more status because of their system of being oppressed in the patriarchy above all other people. And you can't argue against that as a secular humanist because you have nothing to stand on. You have no rhetorical point against the critical theorists. The same queerness that is sexual is applied to all aspects of society. Being brown is queer. Being a woman is queer. Having different sexual expressions, any kind of fetish is queer. Everything that's not patriarchal, which is really essentially the values of Christian society, those things are good, plus throwing in all the minorities in there for no reason whatsoever, by the way, just to get a greater coalition, and lumping all women into it, is supposed to be what is to be upheld. And this forms these weird coalitions, for example, between these folks and the Islamicists. Why are they united? Why are they together? They're together because they're against one thing. And what everyone is actually against, what everyone is truly against, all these people are all against Christ. They're all against God, and they unite because no matter how incoherent, ridiculous, absurd their positions, They unite because they're united in their hatred of the true God.
I just want to, and they might not see it that way. They probably see it as they're united against the hatred of Western civilization, which is obviously founded on Christianity. I just want to read from a report, The Role of the Family in the Support of Facilitating Academic Success. So this is amongst low-income students. So this is it was an academic research paper that looked into the effects of the family, right? And so this is something of what they said. Bear with me, let me find. It says, in conclusion, the choice between... No, my apologies. Let me just find what I wanted to quote. So family emotional support, on the other hand, was related to each outcome. When students reported receiving more emotional support from their families, they were more likely to have a GPA of 3 points or more or higher, more likely to accumulate at least 24 credits. This is within the American educational context, and more likely to persist through the second year of college. 1 point increase on the emotional support scale was associated with 19% higher odds of having a GPA of 3 or higher, 19% higher odds of accumulating at least 24 credits, and 24% higher odds of persisting through the second year. So in other words, the report was demonstrating that when you've got strong family support, i.e. because you've got strong families, educational achievement for the poor is more successful than when you don't have strong families supporting poor students. This is just one of countless studies that demonstrate the power and the effectiveness on the family in terms of supporting and helping society as a whole. I just want to say, Idris, I did see you try and come back in, but I can see you're still having IT problems. Daniel, what would you like to say to either what I've said or Mary before Chris?
No, we can just give the word to Chris. I have nothing more to add to what you guys have said, or I have said.
Okay.
Cool. So all I would say really is I don't think a focus on like a libertine ethic, a focus on the individual as the greatest thing that should be prioritized over all else, the obsession with pleasure and hedonism, it's not actually sustainable. It will ultimately lead to the death of everyone, society, and the self, largely because what we desire to do is not conducive to future human beings. So I think it's just interesting to point that out. I don't know if anyone disagrees with that, but it seems to me there isn't a way that you could hold both things in contradiction with each other, that you want to do the things that you desire to do, and everyone has that freedom, and also there needs to be some sort of functional society that is able to continue long past after we're gone. I don't think those things are solvable. I think they're in contradiction.
I think that what we're essentially arguing to the secular humanists is that your philosophy doesn't work. Like, your emphasis on the individual autonomous self is actually a self-defeating value system. The idea of turning the autonomous self into a godlike creature that has the rights to choose life and death over its children, the idea that the autonomous self is more important than the family, the idea that the autonomous self even exists is not just logically incoherent to your materialism, but it is ultimately a destructive philosophy to follow, because it doesn't actually match with reality. The reality is, as the Judeo-Christian tradition presents, that a life that is centered around the other, and the other in this case being God, is one that is filled and imbued with meaning, that when it is supported within the idea of a strong family unit, creates solid, well-adjusted people, humans, to interact with the society that you're trying to create. And that all of this is underpinned by a meaning that rises above the scope that you can achieve from a materialistic point of view. And so what we're essentially saying is if you want the greatest good, if you want human flourishing, then you should choose Christianity as the answer to that. I mean, that's kind of like how I would try to summarize this. You know, this
and also Bob, you also know the statistics also for the atheist and secular part. Like, despite how vocal it is online and stuff, and also what you might see some on the news and in media, the atheists and the secularists, like, they are not reproducing so much. You know, they will die out if they not get their act together, because Christians and Muslims and other religions, they are much more active on the line when it comes to reproducing and stuff. So it is like a statistic game. They will not last unless they change something with that. And
okay, just to interrupt briefly, I do see Ozine in the back. Yeah. Ozine, I will let you in once Daniel's finished his point. Go on, finish your point, Daniel.
Yes, and I am not, and there are also atheists that agree and see this. Like even the late Christopher Hitchens, you know, he was also not a fan of abortion and stuff, because it is what it is. And I mean, there are even I think a Facebook group that I was with inside, and they were even like, it's like atheists advocating for like pro-life, atheists. So they see the obstacle that is ahead of them if they don't change their course in this, and that is the logical conclusion also.
Yeah, I do think though, where Christians have been influenced by liberalism, we Christians are also suffering a demographic collapse.
Yeah.
Because we're buying into liberal narratives about the romantic model of creating families, and it's just not working. But on that happy note, I'm going to bring in Ozine. Ozine, nice to have you. Just before we begin, can you confirm that you are a secular humanist, please?
I am not a secular humanist. I'm more of a libertarian. I follow like the philosophy of Stoicism, but secular humanism seems to be too, like, they just talk about human flourishing, I think is like their newest manifesto, which is like, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but
right. I mean, this is a show for secular humanism. I'll put it to the vote, guys. Should we? Well, do you want to talk or open up the space for someone who calls themselves secular humanist?
What I would suggest is just ask some questions about what you think about. Would you say liberalism? Was that what you subscribe to? A libertarian. Okay,
classical
so
liberal, more so.
Well, actually,
classical liberal.
Yeah, I mean, we've only got about 15 minutes left, so I don't think we're going to get many secular humanists barging at the doors in the last sort of 15-20 minutes. So
I do want to make
Ozine.
Oh, sorry. I do want to make one very final point before we wrap up, though. So,
Mary, one second. I want to let Ozine reply. Go on, Ozine. Over to you.
Yeah, I just heard a couple things that just sort of spurred me to come on, like talking about atheists will die out or whatever because he won't reproduce. But atheism isn't a genetic like defect or something like that. So atheists are sort of convinced that a God well, if you go like the popular definition, atheism is just somebody who lacks a belief in God. But I'm more of a philosophical atheist where I believe God doesn't exist. But so that doesn't seem to follow. And I think a secular humanist would agree if there's Christian ethical positions that improve human flourishing, they would support those specific positions, but I don't see how you're going to convince them to adopt Christianity overall, because that requires them to actually accept the principle that Jesus is, God and all that stuff. And an atheist isn't going to accept that as true. That doesn't mean they won't value some parts of it.
Yeah, I think the thing is that the whole project of secular humanism is older than lots of secular humanists recognize. Certainly, Matt Dillahunty portrays a picture that secular humanism is dated to the 1930s. That's not true. Secular humanism is dated to the 1700s, the late 1700s. And the whole, the secular humanist project is something that's been going on since the 1700s. The reality is that it was initially meant to replace the underpinnings of values, precisely because society had abandoned God. But it was like trying to have Christian values without having Christianity. That was the point of the sort of an Enlightenment philosophies and secular humanism. But we've now seen, after 300 years of retrospect, that actually secular humanism you can't sustain the good values of Christianity without the metaphysical beliefs. And so you can't have successfully the good values of Christianity without the metaphysical beliefs that underpin it and hedge it in.
Well, then you can't, that just goes against your point. Then you can't convince an atheist to accept those metaphysical beliefs of Christianity, to have those values, if that what you're saying actually follows, which I don't agree that it necessarily follows. But I think in Matt's case, Matt's talking about the actual organization, the secular humanist organization. I understand like the broad concept of secular humanism did arise out of the Enlightenment in the 18th century, basically, that there were probably more atheists back then than there are today, really. But I'm not sure about that. It seems like there's a lot of
I think maybe you've kind of misunderstood my point. I'm not trying to say become Christian because Christian values are great. I'm saying secular humanism doesn't work, Christianity does. And then the next sort of move from that is to ask, why does Christianity work? Why? And that's because it is a more logically, philosophically coherent position to hold than secular humanism.
And
well,
that
how
is,
doesn't it work if human populations like 1,000 times, or really much even more than that, it's like 12 times what it was like in the year 1700. We're reaching 8 billion population, and if the Enlightenment led to a expansion of the human population, a decrease in hunger, a great expansion in human long lifespans, right? So back in right before, I think it was the smallpox vaccine or whatever, like human life not smallpox. Yeah, I think that's it. Human life expectancy was like 30 years on average across the globe. Population was like 500 million. By 1950, there was like 100% vaccination across the globe, and human life expectancy was around 70 in the 1950s, and the population was in the billions. Now it's 8 billion. So that seems to me like a product of the secular humanist values and not Christian values.
I'm going to reply to that, and then I'm going to let Mary come in.
Yeah,
so
sorry.
The thing, no, it's okay. You're quite right to reply, and you're more than welcome. The thing is, it's not like the Enlightenment, liberal secularism replaced Christianity overnight with a click of a finger. And so the Christian values still permeated huge sections of society in the early 1700s. Nor is it the case that the Enlightenment gave birth to science. The fact is, science arose out of a Christian milieu. The thing that occurred at the Enlightenment was that we put religion on the back burner and religious identity on a low heat, and we reorganized society around the idea of the nation state, social contract between citizen and nation state, and the idea of the individual, using an empiricism of rationalism and empirical science as our root truth. But the reason, that the human population continued to expand was because actually most people live their day-to-day life still being largely influenced by Christian values, which were pro-family and pro-life. It's not until the 1960s that you get essentially the final death of Christian values in popular culture that had been rotting for centuries since the 1700s. But it's in the 1960s that liberal, secular, humanist values go mainstream in popular culture. And it's from, and it's since that time that the West has started its path to demographic collapse. Now, before you reply to that, please write down what you want to say to me, and then I'm going to let Mary speak. Go on, Mary.
Okay. So one thing, I did not say that the only way that atheists reproduce is by having children. I am saying that societies that adopt those types of ideas collapse entirely. They suffer demographic collapse. They go to extinction. These types of ideas, when they pop up, they typically do not last very long because we have more wealth now. People don't start starving immediately. Probably have legs for a bit longer now, but it is doomed. It's doomed by itself. There have been, so in the Enlightenment, vast number of people were Christians, including the people involved in the Enlightenment itself. They were doing things for Christian reasons. They believed that science was interpretable because the world was created by a God who had a mind of which we have the image. We have the image of God's mind, and therefore we should at least be able to understand a good deal of it. If you have a lot of hubris, you'll say, we'll understand everything. And that is why this began in the Christian areas and not in Islam. Islam has accidentalism. Other systems have other beliefs that preclude you from developing natural laws. We believe in a God who is a lawgiver. And that really boils down to the core of the truth of Christianity. It isn't just that you have to have something very much like Christianity to have an ability to talk about value in any kind of meaningful way. There are a few other religious systems that you kind of can, but if there is meaning, then our God or something very similar is a true statement. It's also because Trinitarianism itself is the best reflection of humanity and how humanity is unique. Why humans are sinning if they torture animals, but a cat is not sinning if it is torturing a mouse. Or even a dolphin is not sinning if it is raping a female dolphin, even though it has much higher intelligence than a lot of other animals. It explains why humanity, what is dominion, what is our role, and it explains us as being creators in the image of the Creator, and our relations to each other on the basis of the Trinity itself, the knowing, the knower, and the known. The relation between each other is both reflected in the Trinity itself, in the relations in the family, but also the relation between God and his creation is also reflected in the relationship between within the family, between the husband and wife, between the parents and the children and everything else. That all of this analogy creates a society.
Mary?
Hang on, I'm almost done. Creates a society that is the society that is comprehensible, leads to flourishing, is understandable, is livable, results in the correct outcomes if it is followed. And the failure of people to follow this is also explained, as well as a mode by which we can reach for better in the
Mary,
incarnation and the redemption. I'm done.
And I'm just gonna I know that Daniel has to leave at this point. So Daniel, if you want to say your goodbyes to everybody, and then I'm gonna let Ozine come in and reply.
Yeah, that will be great. But can I just say a 20 seconds thing before I go, because we'll talk like I don't dispute what Ozine said about that was a flourishing in the 700s. But I think also it's important to acknowledge what happened before and after that also, like even these grand universities that we have, Harvard with the slogan of truth for Christ in the church, it used to be. Oxford, the Lord is my light, the famous psalm, and even in between 1901 and 2000 of the Nobel Prizes, Christians, or the winners that won, 78% of them identified as Christians. In 72% in chemistry, 65 in physics, 62 in medicine, 54 in economics, and 49 in literature. So I just like I said, I don't dispute the flourishing from 1700 up, but I think it's important to take into consideration what happened before and what has happened after. That it's not like the Christians were not involved in that flourishing up to and after. And with that said, I have to go because it's late in my part of Europe. It was nice seeing you, Ossian, and my brothers and sisters in Christ on the screen and in chat. Take care.
Peace be with you. I just want to acknowledge. Peace be with you. God bless Daniel. I just want to acknowledge Vocab's joined us at last. What time do you call this? Like, you know, yeah. What happened to 7 o'clock British time?
Yeah, I got confused on the time. It's such a massive difference, but that's my bad. In a second, I might have to switch devices here because I got to be mobile. But I'm just listening in really right now. Appreciate the conversation.
It's good to have you, Vocab. Ozine, you've been very patient and very gracious in your patience. How would you like to reply to what you've heard?
I can't reply to all of that, but I'll try to reply to something you said, maybe nitpick a little bit, where you talked about like how involved human, like it seemed like you're trying to say like Christianity was greatly involved in the explosion of human population, but Christians have never really made up more than maybe 25 or so % of the human population. I know that's what it is today. So it's not like they are entirely involved, but I think Christians, people that worked in science in the West, were ones that were greatly involved in creating the technology and stuff like that. If they were Christians, we'll just pretend like they all were Christians for the sake of the argument. Like developing vaccines, ways of traveling and stuff like that. But I don't think that's because they were Christian that those things happened that inspired the expansion of human population. And I'd be interested in talking about this later. I know you're ending this pretty soon, but because there's a lot of stuff Mary said.
Joined us. I'm going to try and keep this going for at least another half an hour.
Yeah, just so you know, Ozian.
1 second, Mary.
David.
Mary, 1 second. So, Ozine, I want to make sure that you finished what you were saying.
No, I'm good. Go ahead, Mary, or whoever you want next.
Right. Yeah. So I would just say that I was responding to what you were saying about human population expanding since the Enlightenment, and that is connected to the Industrial Revolution. But the reason why the scientific worldview emerged as a paradigm, as a possible paradigm, was precisely because of the Christian worldview. The idea that there was a God with a mind who thought and created a world with rational laws that were repeatable, that are subject to experiment, and whose thoughts we could think after him through investigation. The natural philosophers began investigating the natural world precisely because of their Christian faith, because of the presuppositions that their Christian faith gave them, which have been absorbed into the scientific methodology. And so it is because of their faith that you ended up with a scientific paradigm as we experience it in the West, which is not to say that other civilizations didn't do science. Of course they did. You know, human beings did science generally because out of necessity comes innovation. Chinese society in some ways was far in advance of European society, but Confucianist values didn't sustain a scientific project. The scientific project was sustained by a Christian worldview. One of the most, the Catholic Church, for instance, has been one of the most consistent and largest funders of scientific inquiry in history. And has done so throughout its entire history. I'll let Mary jump in at this point.
Yeah, I can't find it right now, but David Wood broke it down very, very simply. The beginning with the supposition that the laws, that the universe has these things that can be empirically observed and are meaningful. The idea that it's meaningful, that's not something, you just take that for granted because you're born into our society today. That is not something that other societies took for granted. For example, in Islam, that is like basically apostasy. Islam has a view of the world that is accidentalist. You cannot talk about any cause or effect outside of Allah. The Hindu world has the idea that the Atman and the Brahman and all of that stuff, the accretions are what powers what happens. The cause and effects are inside of that. If you go to the view of the before Confucianism, things like Taoism and stuff like that, they do not have a view of how the world works. Their cosmology did not allow for the kinds of cause-effect investigation. So what I'm saying is that our view about why this, why us, how this, why us, uniquely positioned Christians to be able to discover these laws that actually were, because we were right about what the world was like fundamentally. So that was, and it's really like, it's kind of really confusing when you start going into these other societies and you're like, wait, they believe what? Because we are so much in a society where we're immersed in this kind of axiomatic faith in these things, but it's not inherent to humanity and is quite unusual.
Just to double down on that, in one single example, in Hindu religion, reality is often described as an illusion, whereas within the Christian faith, reality, and when I say reality, I mean the world around us, is an objective fact created by God. So it's not clear that all religious philosophies hold to the kind of assumptions necessary to create a scientific paradigm. Over to you, Ozzy.
Yeah, I have presuppositions I hold as true, like I exist, the external world exists, causation is true. And I do understand, like in Islam, they view like Allah as that force that interacts between two things, that's what causes things to happen. I've done refutation videos of some of those claims that they've made. And I do agree, like with Hinduism, I'm not sure necessarily illusion, but like, I think they view everything sort of like it's based upon your personal perspective. But I'm not an expert. You probably know more than me about that, Bob. But I don't have much controversy with that, but I don't think it's necessarily true. It stems from Christianity. It does seem to stem from Western civilization. If you look at the history, I went to school to study Western civilization history. But it seems to more stem from the Greek philosophers and stuff like that who are doing really good science. You look at Aristophanes and stuff like that and stuff that he was doing. And he wasn't a Christian, but he was like still sort of presupposing this cause and effect thing. And it seems like those people had more of an influence on Christianity than maybe Christians give it credit for here.
Well, responding specifically to that.
Sorry, what is it about the don't you see that there's something about the Christian worldview that recognize the truth of those philosophies to maintain their philosophical tradition? That anything we know about the Greek philosophers is because the church maintained the record. If there was countless philosophers we probably don't even know about, but the fact that the church recognized something of these philosophies so that we can discuss them today demonstrates that even at the very beginning of Christianity, there was something intrinsic to Christianity that it could recognize the value of this philosophical contribution to absorb it into the Christian faith. Mary, and then Ozzy.
Okay, just very
then
quickly,
Ozzy, then Chris.
Because the Greek approach was inductive. It was not empirical, right? It was not deductive. It wasn't empirical. You did have a few exceptions, like a couple of tests that, I'm not even going to remember his name right now. But anyhow, he threw the salamander into the fire and then later locked up some rotted meat and it didn't produce anything. One of them was Aristotle. Pliny the Elder was the other one. And so you have these examples of experimentation, but overall, because of their view of men being so elevated, they could not change from an inductive model that is not fundamentally something that is tested to an empirical model of the material world where you do test things, because men can't just sit there and argue and expect that their different arguments, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, within themselves are going to be sufficient to find truth, because men are imperfect. We live in a fallen world. We live in a broken world. People are going to make lots of mistakes, and you can't expect that just through this logical argumentation you'll end up with this perfect thing. And that is part of the reason why there was a controversy specifically with the Catholic Church when we went to that model for a little while, because the church felt like, you know, if it's rightly guided, then maybe we should be able to do that, rather than, you know, maybe we're perfect enough that we can do this authoritatively. But folks are like, no, world's broken, things are messed up. We've really got to go to this other model that is a more testable, ideally, even though a lot of things are not testable. But the idea is that you're going to try to test and experiment and try and explain things with models and things like that, if at all possible. And that is going to be a better way of finding truth, because of the nature of who we are, not just the logic of the universe, but also the anthropology of man.
Okay, Ozine, how would you like to reply?
I just they were talking about the Greek philosophers used induction. I'm not sure how true that is, but that is the scientific method. We do use induction in the scientific method to do empiricism. Its foundation is induction. So we don't make proof claims, like absolute truth claims, when we use the scientific method. We say it's the best evidence or the best explanation of the evidence we have based upon what we've experienced and what we tested. So that is science. So if you read Popper, he was a famous 20th century scientific philosopher. And
sorry,
he covers
I just
this.
completely misspoke. I meant deductive. Apologies.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
I said it backwards the whole time. That's why I was confusing you. I don't know why I did that. I was like, wait a second.
Yeah, they everything was grounded dogmatically, and that's where like Agrippa's trilemma comes from, the Greek philosophers too, where you have to like bite the bullet at some time where you have to be like a global doubter, right? And I'm not a global doubter. I believe certain things are true, and I think we can be dogmatic about our precepts, and as long as they explain the external world, that's fine. But that's not empiricism. But you corrected yourself. So that's cool.
Sorry about that. So that kind of made a hash of what I was saying. So what I was sorry.
I think everybody just needs to replay what Mary said and replace the word inductive with deductive.
Yes.
And you get her point. Ozine. You said we. Are you part of the scientific community? You spoke as if you're part of the scientific community.
I mean, we as humans, like humanity in general.
I mean, this kind of brings me to another problem that I have with liberal secular humanism, which is this common concept of humanity. But unfortunately, you said you're not a human secular humanist. So, and
I value humans, if that matters. Oh no, but I just wanted to.
What's happening?
I did want to respond to what you said, though, Bob, in that. When we were talking about the Greek philosophers, but the Greek philosophers were already part of the culture, like the Roman culture, when Rome adopted Christianity as its national, or I don't know what you want to call it, like the religion that their empire. They eventually, like 100 years after that, they banned all of the religions. But so it was already part of the culture. So it would make sense that they would adopt Christianity as an overlay over that. And I think you'd have to look at Judaism to see, like, if they were doing science, to see if they were adopting these Greek philosophies. And I don't think you could say that. But so I don't know how you can tear it apart between, was it the culture that they overlaid Christianity over, or did Christianity adopt these other principles?
I will come back to that, but I know Chris has been waiting very patiently to speak, and I know Mary, bless her, has always got loads that she wants to try and funnel down the narrow bandwidth. So, Chris, go on.
Sure. So Ozine, is it Ozine or Ozian?
Ozian. Ozian.
Sorry, I've been mispronouncing your name the whole time.
That's okay. People do it all the time.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, we all know what it's like. So from my perspective, we would probably, me and you, generally speaking, have probably a large amount of our ethics and values be very, very similar. Because I'm assuming you're from the United States, I'm guessing, based on your accents. I'm from the UK, and we both have quite a similar history that is rooted in Judeo-Christian values. Now, when we say, and I think this is fair, when we say that Christianity was the backdrop of which the Enlightenment emerged, for example, or the scientific method, or whatever you want to talk about, we're not saying that Christians all of a sudden woke up one day and went, I want to go and study something specifically because I'm a Christian. I don't think anyone thinks that's kind of how that works, but rather it was through a set of presuppositions that the Christian world had that gave people the inclination and the freedom to use whatever reason they may have at the time to go out and explore the world. And that wasn't necessarily the case for all parts of the world. You mentioned the Muslim world, right? With the philosophy of obscurantism, where they think that Allah creates every cause. So when you strike a match against a rough surface, it isn't some natural causes, the state of the match, the state of the sulfur, and the state of the friction on the surface that caused the spark to appear, the flame, but rather it's just Allah willing it to be the case. Like when you have that kind of philosophy, and that's true today as much as it was back in the medieval period, it's very hard to have a scientific worldview. It's very hard to have what became the Enlightenment occur, but because Christians did have this, God is reason. God is a mind which uses reason, and because we are in the image of God, and that's me and everyone in this room and everyone in the world, including Muslims and all over, we're not just holding it to ourselves. We are capable of relating in some sense. And that's amazing. Like from our perspective, wow, we can go out and look at the world and we can decipher what reasons, what theodicies, all sorts of things about why God could have done things the way that we think he has. So we're not trying to have this hard sort of like exclusivity. I don't think that's fair to say. I think, we talk about Judeo-Christian values precisely because the Christian values, what came before those? It was the Jewish values that preceded it, right? So that's why we use these terms. We use the term Judeo-Christian. So likewise, in Second Temple Judaism, they would have understood the world to be that God also is rational. You can relate in a rational sense. So there are a set of boundaries that we need to meet in order to be able to rationalize the world. And Christianity, Judaism is one of those, but there's also many that aren't. But I think really, just before anyone jumps in there, like I said, we probably all have very similar values. What has happened, and I think during the Enlightenment, most people had very similar values again, with some exceptions. The further we are into this postmodern world, and you said that you aren't a postmodernist because you said you believe in the objective world, which is great. I likewise agree as a Christian in the objective world. We have to think, well, what is it that stops people from arguing against those Judeo-Christian values, even if you're an atheist? Like you want to separate Christianity and Judeo-Christian values. You don't think there needs to be a link there. But as soon as you remove that link and you don't refer to the Christian faith as a grounding for those values, it's up for debate. Someone could come in and say, well, actually, I think that a libertine form of sexuality is like good because pleasure is good. And at that point, you start to really have to think, hang on, how do I defend against that? Because all of a sudden, I can't point to what is defined as an objective source, that God is a logically necessary being and is logically good and the greatest of all conceivable goods. That's no longer the case. So what do I have left? Well, I don't really have much left. And we're saying that that's flawed. Okay, so although me and you agree on probably most things, you have to affirm the Christian faith to strengthen that. Otherwise, it falls to the wind. And that would be me.
Okay, I just want to recognize that Wesley's joined us. Wesley, Ozian's going to reply to what he's heard, or Ozian's going to reply to what he's heard. And could you just confirm you're a secular humanist or an atheist materialist?
I'm the little book in Revelation. I'm a theist.
Oh, then I'm afraid this conversation, I apologize. This conversation is only for...
One question.
I'm going to remove you. I'm sorry. Okay. Some people...
It's him again. Every time he comes in, it's the same guy. Just he thinks he's getting revelations from God.
Oh, okay. Right, Ozian, how would you like to reply to what you've heard? And we're going to then start wrapping this up.
So like Christians like presuppose like God is rational. It's part of their worldview. And I think that's important that you have to do that. You have to believe that God is truthful, that God isn't involved in the interaction between all things. But I don't know how you can know that's true except as a presupposition. It seems like if God was like the demiurge, that he can not allow for knowledge. Like if Allah is the truth, then how do you know if it's really God making you believe that that match is striking against a rock and causing it to light? And I do understand that problem there, but I think that is a problem. If God does exist, you have to like trust that God is truthful, that he's not going to interfere with those type of interactions in order to do science and stuff like that. And maybe those precepts that what was it, Aquinas that basically formalized all those precepts? I don't know where that happened within the
tradition. The tradition. I mean, Aquinas probably summarized them rather well. Aquinas was doing an exercise in reconciling Christian theology to Aristotelian philosophy, because in Aquinas' time, Aristotle was rediscovered.
Mm-hmm.
And that
I recall that history.
Yeah, that was Aquinas' project. But I want to show you that this idea of rationalism in nature, it was something that is revealed in our earliest text. You would agree that speech is a rational exercise, yes?
I have no problem with that. No.
Yeah. So in Psalm 19, which is was revealed to King David, it says this: "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse proclaims the work of his hands. Day after day they pour out speech. Night after night they communicate knowledge. There is no speech, there are no words. Their voice, there is no speech, there are no words. Their voice is heard. Their message has gone out to the whole earth, and their words to the ends of the world." Now, this is saying that the cosmos communicates. It is, and when you say we talk about communicates, we're talking about the fact that it is declaring the glory of God. It is declaring the Creator. And I could present to you an argument from maths. I could present to you an argument from the very precise nature of the cosmos and how it is ordered and organized in such an unbelievable way. It points towards it being designed. But the very fact that the universe is described as talking to us means that the scriptures is saying that the universe is rational, because it's saying that it is communicating to us. So that's saying that mind to mind, that we can understand what the universe is saying to us, which means that we can have an interaction with the universe, that we can learn from the universe and learn about the universe. So this is a very this is a very sort of fundamental principle within the Christian religion, the idea of an ordered universe that can be understood by our minds and by all human minds. Not just the Jewish mind, but all human minds can understand this. So it's making a statement about all human minds and about the nature of the universe, saying that one can investigate, can learn from the other, because there is a communication between the two. And that communication, that language, is mathematics.
Okay. I presuppose mathematics. I don't believe mathematics I'm a non-realist when it comes to mathematics, but I don't think that matters to the argument. I think we can explore reality using mathematics and logic and physics and all that stuff. I don't accept the concept that the universe speaks to us through mathematics, but if that provides grounding and framework to support your belief that it does, I have no problem with that.
Well, I would just point out that babies learn to count by their experience of nature.
They learn to recognize objects, right? And how many objects there are. They can duplicate it with the number of fingers, but the words they utter...
We learn to count by our encounter with nature. So in other words, mathematics is being taught to us by the world around us.
Yeah, the words they utter we teach them. We teach them one is. I mean, we are born with some linguistic ability.
Whether we say one or uno,
the concepts are there.
But the concept is in nature.
But are we born
from nature?
Yeah, I don't know if we're born with those concepts, because we are born with rudimentary language. I mean, we're born with a scaffold, a mental scaffold into which nature inputs values. So we're born with categories, and nature inputs the values. So we're born with the capacity to count, but we learn numbers from nature. I think we learn numbers from other humans. I don't know if we actually we recognize that, there's 3 of these and there's 3 of those, but we don't
okay, one second. I think that there's confusion. Hang on, between the signifier and the signified. What he is saying is that the signified that we use the signifier to address is real. So there actually is such a thing as there being 15 of something, that is something, that it's real. Not that the word 15 is real. Just like when I say cat, a cat is a real thing. Even love as a concept, that would be real in the terms of that it's something that exists. Unicorns, which don't exist, are real in the sense that the idea of them exists.
I accept that. I believe ideas exist. Concepts exist in minds. They don't exist. They don't have an external referent. Like the number 15, I don't believe has an external referent to minds. If you understand what I'm saying, I don't think love has an external referent to minds. There's nothing we can point out in reality. We can only see it within our own interactions with other minds in reality, or experience it.
Yeah, but if it is, if 15 is not love, right? If 15 is not love, these both do have an existence. I would point you to, you might enjoy reading it quite a bit. It's called The Last Superstition by, who's it by? Last Superstition, sorry. By Feser, Edward Feser. Let me just link that real quick on Amazon. I'll throw it in the chat. Well, you're on your computer, so you will have it. Yeah. It's a really interesting book. I think it's cheap right now. Let's see how much.
My book's free if you got Amazon Kindle.
Just because you've been such a nice ghost, I'll let you plug your atheistic book. Go on, Ozine. What's your book?
It's $17. That's not bad for a publication from an institution.
Ozine, what's your book? Just as because you've been such a lovely guest.
It's called Beyond Faith, by Ozine Talks.
Right. There you go, people.
Yeah.
Boycott the book. Yeah.
Boycott.
I'm joking. Right, go on, Mary. Finish your point.
Oh no, I'm just suggesting that for love to not be 15, then there is a reality in this, and that you can go, and idealism kind of collapses into its own form of realism. Now, if you press hard, and if you don't go into kind of the neo-scholasticism, into a different kind of realism, what you would end up running into in Christian circles, by the way, is that the reality of things is in the mind of God and the knowledge of God. And that's why, 15 isn't hot or whatever, right? As abstract concepts, essentially.
I'm saying that God has fashioned a universe according to his mind, like the universe that we encounter in reality is there by design, essentially, and so
Well,
you can't get to a world in which 15 is hot or love or.
And that each of these things has its reality in God being the mind, there being the mind that creates the world. There's also an interesting YouTube video from someone who is who is this kind of idealistic realist or realistic idealist. It's kind of interesting that is quite persuasive on this topic. But even if you go straight to the true neo-scholasticism, they put forward problems that you can't answer through this, well, it only exists in minds and in the consensus of minds kind of approach. He really presents some interesting arguments in that direction, because I wasn't particularly convinced by scholasticism before I looked into it, because I did not have a prior commitment to it.
Guys, we are gonna have to draw this down to a close. Ozine, any final remarks before you go?
I'm not an idealist. I'll let it go. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on your stream.
And thank you for being patient with me mispronouncing your name nearly every time I spoke to you. It was really lovely to have you on. I wish you well. And
it went better than your Dillahunty debate. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, I mean, like, that guy is just a car crash with everybody he debates, and he brought out the worst in me, you know.
You did sort of like attack him, but anyways. Yeah.
Well, hold on 1 second, because this is his fan. This is his fan club that have captured the narrative. He was quite happy. I didn't attack him. I challenged him on the views of secular humanism, and he did the Dillahunty sidestep, which is that when he wanted to, it was his opinion. When he didn't want it to be, it was secular humanism. And then he played the victim card. I think the narrative, people need to go and rewatch the video more carefully and not let the comments in the comment section influence their perspective, you know. But I did a full review of it. You can go and watch it on.
Yeah, I did too. Anyways.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, you're right. It was much nicer than the debate with Matt. But just in case Matt ever catches this, I got no hard feelings, Matt. And if you ever want to talk again, I'd love to talk with you. You know, I just think we'll need a better moderator. So thank you, Ozian. Have a good day. Good night, and God bless.
Take care, Ozian. God bless you.
Take care, guys.
Okay, Mary and Chris, your final comments to liberal secular humanists. Keep them brief. But yeah, your final comments in conclusion, whoever wants to go first.
So I'm going to jump in first. So I actually think that kind of demonstrated that not many people are willing to defend secular humanism in an explicit sense. The closest we got was right at the end, Ozian, basically, and he came in with his argument. He said himself more of a liberal, a classical liberal.
Libertarian.
And I think libertarian, and then he went on to discuss many different ideas, and we went down a little bit of a philosophy angle as well. But really, he wasn't arguing for a strict form of secular humanism. I think he has his own, at least it seemed to be that he had his own concerns with that. And I think that kind of shows you that secular humanism isn't tenable, and that seems to be quite a popular view, actually. At least it seems to be tonight, anyway. We didn't have many people at all really come on to try and defend that worldview. I think Christianity is evidently, through tradition and history, a superior worldview and form of ethics. I think that in reality, most people generally, especially in the West, hold to Judeo-Christian values, independent of what they actually believe ontologically, because the views of Judeo-Christian values are better. And I think that's great. I think that's a great way to have common ground. I think us and Ozian probably actually have a lot of common ground precisely because we share many of those same values. And I think if he was being consistent, if we were to, I know he's not here anymore, so I won't try and debate him post him leaving, but if we were to go through some of our differences from an ethical point of view, he would probably struggle to give an objective grounding to that and may just have to say, well, this is what I think is good. And really, that's where it starts and where it ends. But thankfully for us, because our faith is grounded in Christ, we have an objective source, God being the logically necessary being, the greatest of conceivable beings, and the most benevolent, loving being. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks be to God. Mary, what are your final comments? And then, just for a laugh, I'm going to bring in Vocab Malone for his final comments.
Hi, Vocab. So
we're literally finishing, bro.
Yep. So
this is like World War I repeated. You know, you come in right at the end, claim the victory as if you did it all the work, and you're coming in at the last minute.
All right. So the root of secular humanism its basis is the presumption of human flourishing, that this has value and that it's best achieved through secular humanism. So it's this self-referent thing. So human flourishing is good. Secular humanism gives you human flourishing, and around and around and around. But the issue is that secular humanism cannot at all provide any argument whatsoever that says that human flourishing matters, nor can any of the systems that it has adopted objectively show that flourishing is achieved in any kind of objective way. Because in terms of suicidality, in terms of interpersonal conflict, in terms of depression, in terms of negative familial outcomes, in terms of everything, the values and activities that today's secular humanists promote are going to be promoting negative things in society. I'm going to kick my dog out.
Okay.
So just my final point. My final point is that we actually have a foundation for our beliefs, and our foundation itself provides a framework in which we actually can have what is objectively, if you choose to call, if you're like, oh, flourishing, that it causes these things, these positive outcomes in society, that to base our society on the knowledge of the relations in the Godhead, the relations of the Godhead to us, and our relation to God, and our relation to creation, and our relation to each other, all within the context of this view, you actually do achieve human flourishing as such in any objective sense, which includes, not slaughtering 50 million innocent children before birth, which includes not having people grow up broken inside because their family structure is damaged. And the only reason it's damaged is that they just don't accept that it's not necessary or some nonsense like that. Like, we actually have these objective standards, or these results that come from our objective framework for modeling our society.
Thanks be to God. Okay, so Vocab, just for fun, since we are now about to finish, I'm going to unmute you, and then if you would like to, can I unmute him? Let's see.
He's still there, right?
Yeah, I think so. If you could unmute, if you want to give your final comments. Like, he's gone vanished. Like, I'm a bit worried.
I'm always a bit worried when you see like a car and the driving, and then it just goes.
Maybe we'll come back to Vocab. So
here he is.
I'm gonna give my final comments.
He's here, I think.
We do have to bring this live.
Right when you were about to put me on. It's just a bad time. Sorry. Hey, I enjoyed the discussion. Great discussion. One thing, if we do this again, that I'd love to talk about or hear about would be the argument from rationality, or the argument from reason, that you kind of got into, Bob, in regards to the scientific revolution, which is like, C.S. Lewis, he had a debate with Elizabeth, I'm not sure how you pronounce her last name, Anascome, at the Socratic Club in the 40s. And he utilized argumentation that he had developed in the book called Miracles. And after the debate, he kind of chiseled it up and sharpened it a little tighter. But it's an interesting argument that has to do with mental states and rationality. And you kind of see versions of it, like with Plantinga and other people. But it's something that not that many people know that Lewis talked about. And it's a pretty interesting argument. I think it goes nicely from my perspective, with somewhat even the transcendental argument for God's existence. I think they're kind of related, like different kinds within the same category, perhaps. But basically that any kind of materialism, any kind of naturalism, any kind of physicalism destroys the very reality of saying something like propositions exist, since propositions are not spatially located. And I just think it's an important area to just talk about or get into. But maybe we could do another show or something. I don't know.
Yes.
But I enjoyed everyone's arguments they brought forth. That's all.
We can do a round 2, and just like Americans in World War II, you can get involved a bit earlier and really save us. You know,
special vocab edition.
Special vocab edition. We'll definitely have you. We'll definitely organise a repeat vocab because I'd love to talk to you about it. So thank you so much, and it was great having you aboard, vocab, and we'll do a proper one with you in the near future. I do have to start to bring this to a close, so I'm gonna finish with my own sort of final comments, and I want to direct my comments to liberal secular humanists of all bents, descriptions, and passions and levels of commitment, which is that what lay before the West is a real choice between an ideology that we've practiced now for 300 years, since the late 1700s, that we can now blatantly see is failing and is eroding in front of us, and into which a militant form of Islam is desperately, stridently trying to take hold of the vacuum created, versus an alternative worldview, which is to return to a form of civilization that has worked for thousands of years. I would say that the West took a misstep, took a hard left turn because of the Reformation Wars. But the difference between the two worldviews could be summarized in this way. Secular humanism offers you a life based around the self. Christianity offers you a life based in discipleship to Christ. Secularism emphasizes the idea of the nation state as the loci of our identity and focal point of our organization, whereas Christians offer you and offer to ourselves the idea of the body of Christ, the church, being the loci of our identity and the focal point of our organization. And the church has existed for 2,000 years and will outlive any of your nation states, whichever one you happen to love and cherish. Secular humanism says that the touch point of morality is a concept of humanity, which is a troublesome concept, which we didn't really get into. Whereas Christians, as we've been articulating, say that the touch point of morality is God, and by its very transcendental nature, offers us a grounding that is not subject to circumstance, chance, and the whims and passions of men and women in social contract. It carries us through all circumstances precisely because it's not attached to those circumstances. Liberal secular humanism has no consistent ethical principles, and there are countless ethical principles that are offered out there, of which situation ethics seems to be the currently popular one amongst the Dillahunty crowd. But you've also got utilitarianism, you've got hedonism, you got countless other kind of ethical systems, and none of them are any more valid than the others. Whereas Christianity teaches us to cultivate virtue whilst avoiding vice. Secular humanism says that what is important, the bedrock of a building block for society, is individualism, whereas Christianity rejects that and says that the building block of a good society is the family. You create healthy families, you get a healthy society, because you get healthy people. Secular humanism offers us an assumptive worldview of materialism. And the problem with that, as being demonstrated by a number of our arguments given tonight, is that you can't get from that to any values. You can't get from a what to an ought. You can't get from chemical brain fuzz to the idea that we should live a life according to charity. Whereas Christianity offers us a life of meaning precisely because it has a concept of truth. And that meaning, it imbues our virtues, our family, our church with significance by which our life can be ordered under the tutelage of our Messiah, Jesus, to the glory of God, which is the purpose for which we do all things. This is the real choice that is open to us. The West is at a crux moment in its history. If it continues to go the path that it will go down, the Western civilization that we value really does run the risk of disappearing and being replaced by something else. Liberalism is a cancer. It is failing, and Christianity is the answer. And it's worked before, and it can work again. And with that, I wish you all a very good night. God bless. It's late, and we do now have to end. So peace be with you, Mary. Peace be with you, Chris. And good night, everybody.
God bless you both. Take care, everyone.